All right, everybody. Happy Sunday. Welcome, welcome. This is a Zorro Bros Oddcast takeover of the Entrepreneurial Web. We have a very special guest today, and with that, I'm going to pass it off to my little brother, Jacob Fox. Jacob, you're on.
Yep, the great Mark Schultz. I actually had to write your accolades down for me to remember. So with us today, a very special guest, three-time NCAA 84 Olympic wrestling gold medalist, two-time world champion, UFC first Olympic gold medalist to ever fight in UFC, I'll add. New York Times best-selling. I've seen a lot of your interviews, Mark, and I haven't heard a lot about this, but you were the Northern California all-around high school.
Northern California all-around gymnastics champion in the age group.
Yeah, so I wanted to ask you about that because your growth and rise and just pretty unlike anything I've ever seen, going from just getting started to and becoming a champion. Do you think your gymnastics played a part in that?
Absolutely. Gymnasts are technically the best athletes in the world. They have the best upper body strength, the best flexibility, the best balance, the best kinesthetic sense. The kinesthetic sense is important. It's knowing where your body is in space at all times. And I was doing 2.5 twisting, 1.5 backs off a 3-meter board, and you have to be able to visualize these complicated, risky techniques in order to do them. And so trying to visualize a wrestling move is 100 times easier than trying to visualize a gymnastics move. These are, back when I was doing gymnastics, it was really risky. It wasn't like today where they got crash pits and stuff. I mean, we had like an 8-inch, mat and then a couple spotters, and some guy'd be like, yeah, try a flyaway. We'll try to catch you. That's about as good as we had it.
Hey, that generation,
you can break your knee.
Just these kids now.
Why is it right? What?
I was saying, y'all, the generation was much tougher than these kids, playing sports now, just across the board. So we were talking on the phone a little bit earlier, and I just kind of touched on it. What would you say the difference between wrestling today and wrestling, let's say, in the 80s?
I don't think there's a lot of difference. The length of the matches is the biggest difference. When I first started wrestling, matches were 9 minutes long in freestyle and 8 minutes long in collegiate, and that is extremely hard. And when I was a sophomore in college, they cut the freestyle matches down to 6 minutes, and they cut college matches down to 7. So that was really helpful for my physiology, because I'm extremely anaerobic. I do not have a lot of aerobic power, but I have a lot of anaerobic power. So when they cut the matches down like that, it was a huge advantage for me, not for guys like Dan Gable, who's aerobically, really super strong. And, like, when I was wrestling 9-minute matches, and I was getting beat a lot, and when they cut it to 6 minutes, I won the Olympics and 2 worlds.
Crazy. Well, I know you had to be in pretty good shape, because I've seen some matches where the match is done and then afterwards. So you had to be in pretty good shape to knock out a backflip after you go, 6.
Yeah, I did those backflips to pay homage to my gymnastics background and kind of rub it into my opponent, like how much energy I had left.
I have a gymnastics question. I have a gymnastics question for you. How many muscle ups could you do in your prime?
Muscle ups? Well, it depends on whether you're talking about doing them with a little kip, you know what a kip is, or not.
I do.
If I did a kip, I could do about 55.
Whoa!
That's unbelievable.
And were they? I mean,
that's a pretty good aerobic strength.
Yeah, and was that on rings? Because they're inherently harder on rings.
On a high bar.
On a high bar, nice. Could you do them on rings?
Oh yeah, I couldn't do that many.
No, that's a lot more
I mean,
strength.
muscle ups, you're going all the way up.
I
you
know.
Pull-ups, going up to your chin.
Yeah, I can still muscle up. My most recent muscle up workout, I did 7 sets of 3. So I got 21 in. I'm 45 years old. That ain't bad for my age, but
that's good. That's really good.
It's hard, but it makes a big difference in training. I agree. Like the gymnastics influence, it's helped me tremendously because I'm usually grappling guys half my age. And it kept me fresh.
Yeah, gymnastics. Technique is the key. I say this all the time. Technique is the king of gymnastics. Conditioning is the king of wrestling. And if you don't have the conditioning, it doesn't matter what techniques you know, you're not going to be able to do them. And so I would try to minimize my deficit, my aerobic deficit, by doing an unbelievable lot of running. And I mean, if you added up all the miles I've ran, I probably circled the world at least once.
Wow.
Yeah, we're no strangers to that.
My high school coach, my high school coach used to say the best athlete would win the first period, the most technical period would go to the most well-conditioned.
Yeah,
I know George St. Pierre.
To give you an idea of what I was facing in college, Ed Bannock was going to be the first 4-time NCAA champion in history. And him and I wrestled each other 6 times. He won the first 4. I won the last 2. But his nickname is the Horse. And the reason they call him the Horse is because he can run like a horse. When I was at the World Team Training Camp with him in 1983, he ran a 5-minute mile.
And he's built.
That's how he killed his opponents. He pinned or superior his opponents all the way up to the finals. I mean, he just would drive them into exhaustion. That's how he beat me. Was he just gassed me out?
So
I had to do a lot of running to try to minimize that weakness.
And that NCAA finals match where you beat him was impact. I think was it 16-8 was the final score?
16-8, that's right.
Yeah, I mean it was just a marathon. Y'all were all over the place. And when we were chatting earlier, I mentioned, as I've noticed, is everybody now just they love the Jordan Burroughs style. They go for leg attacks and the low. You don't see as many guys going really upper body the way that y'all did in the 80s. Do you agree or disagree with that?
That's a very good point. I've never seen a match, a collegiate match, where both guys are standing straight up with both guys ready to throw. I mean, it's very dangerous. Somebody's going to end up on their back. It just depends on who. And when I went for that first inside trip and I blew it and fell right to my back, I was down 4 points immediately. And I was like, man, how am I going to claw my way back into this match? I mean, I'm out of this match unless I can get a high scoring throw. So I locked up with him. I kind of pushed his hips away so he would come into me and attack me. And when he did, I had never done this move before in my life. I just saw a video of Ben Peterson do it in the World Cup. And I was so desperate. I was just like, I'm going to just try it. And so I tried it and it worked. It was a miracle. And thank God it worked out okay. But they called me. I've been called for stalling so many times because of my aerobic power and my lack of aerobic power. So they called me. Referees were just so used to calling me for stalling. They called me for stalling against Bannock in that match. And if in my opinion, I'm the one that was doing most of the initiating. And Abel got really mad at my coach, Stan Abel. He was a great coach. I think he's got the record for most penalty points against a coach of any college. And he's yelling at the referees. My brother grabs him and has to pull him back to his chair because he's going to get, I'm going to pay the penalty if he gets in trouble. But he's a great coach, wow. Great guy.
So interesting. I'm not sure how much you keep up with MMA now. You see a lot of these, like the Islam chef I mispronounce his name constantly. The Khabib Nurmagomedovs and the Chim guys like to go upper body. Do you think the guys over east, the Russians are do a lot more of the upper body stuff in training than we do in America?
I wouldn't say that, but I would say that the Eastern Bloc countries are dominating MMA now. I mean, because it's part of their culture. Wrestling, you look at the top all-time greatest MMA fighters. Most of them, I think 8 out of the top 10 are wrestlers. And wrestling has a very high position of status in those countries. And so, you look at the people in government over there, they got cauliflower ears. They're the president of Mongolia's got cauliflower ears.
That's awesome.
So I listen to him. I don't listen to anybody else. No, I'm kidding.
Yeah, I listen to the guy that's got cauliflower ear. That's awesome.
It's a good point that you bring up, because I trained with Henzo's MMA team several days a week, just as a dummy. they throw me around. He's fantastic. What a great dude. And the head coach there is always talking about how that most of the champs these days in the UFC and MMA in general have a very strong wrestling background. And you were
better than having a wrestling background, having a collegiate wrestling background, because those guys know how to escape and ride. And you look at like Khabib's style, he's basically riding his opponents while he's punching them.
Right. So you were
Yo Romero. Yo Romero is a world champion. He's silver medalist in the Olympics. He cannot get away from the bottom because he's had no collegiate wrestling experience. I mean, look at Bo Nickel. I mean, I think Bo Nickel's probably going to be the next champion because he's a collegiate wrestler. He's got the conditioning. He's got the mental attitude. He's got the technique. I mean, his technique is flawless.
I've never thought about that, the riding time aspect, because you give up if your opponent has one at the end of the match, they get a riding time point, which many times decides a major decision. In college, you just can't stay down there. And in freestyle, we know that in parterre, guys just hit the mat in 20 seconds. And if you can't turn them, we're back on our feet. I never really thought about that. Riding is just a critical factor in college where you just have to get up off bottom. You'll get beat up down there, literally. I
think it's the greatest foundation you can have for MMA. Of course, you got to have jiu-jitsu training, and you got to have some punching and boxing and Muay Thai.
Well, I was watching back your fight this morning with Gary Goodridge, and you were the first elite Olympic wrestler to come into MMA, and I just found it fascinating. I mean, did you have some sort of striking background before squaring up to him? Because you just stood right in front of him, and you did not look the least bit concerned about the fact that he was going to try to punch you. You just kind of pressed forward and shot in for your shots.
Well, I modeled my style after Rickson Gracie, and he has a very unique style where he stays out of their range until they get too close, and then he closes the distance and takes them down. And so I just tried to stay away because I knew if Gary got close to me, he'd knock my head off. So I just tried to stay away from him until he got too close, and then I attacked.
It looked pretty close from the video. You look pretty close to him.
Yeah.
Your hands were out. You
really close. Then you can't get hurt by the punches that much because they can't wind up. Right. And when you're on top,
so when I understand
most wrestlers are going to be on top. It's a big advantage.
Yeah.
And I understand you took that fight on this.
I'm sorry?
I heard you took that fight on just a very...
You're breaking up, but I know what your question is.
Yeah, short notice.
It was 1 day's notice.
Athletic
I was training
commissions wouldn't even allow that.
What?
I was saying athletic commissions wouldn't even allow that now.
Yeah, I
to
was
take him.
training Dave Benefield. I got a call from my. I had this match with Rickson Gracie in the BYU wrestling room, and afterwards, I found out he had a student in living right there in Provo, Utah, of all the places on earth. Pedro Sauer moved to Provo, Utah from Brazil. And so I call him up one day and I say, can I be your student? And I became a student for like 3 years. And he calls me up one day and says, hey, Dave Beneteau is going to fight in the UFC 9. Can you train with him? I said, yeah. So he brings him down. I trained with him for 2 weeks. And then I picked him up one day and slammed him. And I broke this metacarpal in his hand. And I took him to the hospital and they said, well, if you put a cast on, obviously you can't fight. But if we put a plate in, maybe you can cover it up with makeup and hide it and you can still fight. So he did that. He put the plate in. And then I said, I'm going to go to Detroit with you because I think you're going to get in trouble with that hand. So I went to Detroit with him thinking I'm going to be his corner man, throwing the towel in if he gets in trouble. And we go into the press conference and somebody ratted him out and said his hand was broke. And so the doctor comes over to him, looks at him and says, I'm not going to let you fight. And so everybody kind of turned and looked at me and I go, okay. So I walk over to Bob Meyerowitz. I said, hey, what do you think about me taking Dave's place? And he said, and I quote, he goes, oh, that's a great idea. You're Olympic champion. When you lose, it'll be even better. I'm like, what? So anyway, then, and then I said, I need a day to think about this or let me sleep on it overnight. So I'm in my room in the hotel trying to get some sleep. And they're calling me like every 3 hours, all throughout the night, waking me up. I'm like, hey, you guys are going to ruin my ability to fight if you keep waking me up like this. But then 10 in the morning, they call and say, we got to have a decision right now or we're getting someone else. So I got Pedro to go down there with me. And Bob and Art Davies is sitting right there. And I said, give me 1 more minute. And I went over to the corner and I started to pray. This is 4 months after my brother was murdered. And so I go over to this corner, I'm starting to pray. And I felt like somebody, maybe my brother, maybe Jesus, I don't know. Somebody was standing behind me telling me I had to do it. Maybe it was just Pedro breathing down my neck. I don't know. But I got up, turned around, told Pedro I was doing it, and then went over to sign the contract. And then we went out back, I did some wind sprints with Pedro, and then we got a cup. And then one of Pedro's students brought a size 10 wrestling shoe with him. That's my size. And I didn't bring any wrestling shoes. And there was only 2 rules in that UFC, no biting and no eye gouging. But there was a third rule. And it was if you decided to wear shoes, you couldn't kick. So I decided I needed traction more than I needed to kick. So I decided to wear the shoes. And then we got an AIDS test. And then a couple hours later, I'm in the octagon fighting.
That is crazy. That's absolutely crazy. So you mentioned Rickson, and I've heard this story, and you substantiated it. How did this all happen with you and Rickson at BYU?
No, this is a crazy story. This guy calls me. I'm the assistant coach at BYU now, and I get a call from this guy, and he goes, "Hey, is this Mark Schultz, Olympic wrestling champ?" Yeah. He goes, "The greatest jiu-jitsu fighter in the world is in town. Do you want to fight him?" I was like, well, what are the rules? And he's trying to intimidate me. And he goes, there are no rules. I'm like, really? No rules at all? None? What, are we going to gouge each other's eyes out? Bite each other's throats out? I don't know. So I say, look, I'll do it. Just give me a week. I got to go to the NCAAs. And then we'll do it when I get back. I can't even think straight for the next week. I don't know who this guy is. I don't know what's going to happen. I never done anything like that before. But day comes, I walk in the wrestling room, and there's Rickson Gracie scooting on his butt towards Alan Albright, my boss. And he's trying to hook his heels with his feet. And he had this really long ponytail, like the guy in Kumite. and he looked just like, and he had really thick cauliflower ears. So I was like, oh, this is going to be tough, you know. And so he stands up, walks over to me. He goes, "Are you the guy?" I go, "Yeah, I'm the guy." "Are you the guy?" He goes, "Yeah, I'm the guy." And he goes, "What I do," and he says a really thick Brazilian accent. He just came to America. He's like, "What I do is punch, kick, elbow, knee, but today we submission grappling until we tap out." I was like, "Thank God there's not going to be a homicide." So he goes in the middle of the room and he goes like this with his hands. He just goes like that. And so I go, "Okay, here we go." And I shoot on him. And I got him in a cradle for about 20 minutes. And there's no talking going on. We're just, I don't know what I'm doing. And he, you know, and so I'm just making up moves on the fly, you know. And I knew how to do a double wrist lock, which the Brazilians came to America 10 years after I did the double wrist lock and renamed it the Kimura. But I knew the double wrist lock. I knew from some judo training to keep my elbows in and my chin down. So it was difficult for him to get me in submissions also, but it was almost impossible for me to get him because that's all he does. And he's the best in the world. So he after my grip from the cradle gives out. I mean, I had him in a cradle for 20 minutes. My grip finally just gave out. I couldn't even grab him with my hand anymore. And he throws his legs up around my upper body, and it was so weird. I thought, what is this guy doing? And I kind of let him do it. I wanted to see what he was doing. And next thing I know, you know, I'm getting that tunnel vision, you know, where it's closing me. And I tap out. And I go, "Man, that was cool. Let's go again." So we went again for about another 20 minutes. And I'm on top of him now for 40 minutes. And I can't get him on anything. So I'm thinking maybe I should let him get on top of me. So I let him reverse me. And me being a wrestler, I brainwashed myself to go belly down. So I go belly down. I got my arms out real wide, like I'm trying to keep from getting turned and freestyle. He just starts weaving in this rear naked, you know, and finally he's got it. And I'm tapping out again. And afterwards, he said something that just, I love this guy. He goes, "Mark, you're the toughest guy I've ever gone against." I was thinking to myself, man, I love this guy. And I became obsessed with Rickson. And I followed him and modeled myself after him. And that's how it all happened. Oh, but then afterwards, I find out he's got a student, Pedro, right there in Provo. And I became a student of his. And I'm so grateful to Pedro that to let me be his student, because, you know, he didn't have to, but, you know, I give him, I treat him, you know, with honor and respect, you know. And plus I was there in his corner when he had that fight with Mr. Utah, Lance Bachelor. Lance Bachelor gets on the phone. I mean, gets on the radio, or Pedro gets on the radio, and they're talking about Pedro, and he's kind of a superstar in Utah now, and he hasn't really done anything. He's just, you know, because of the Gracie Jiu-Jitsu video came out, everybody was like bowing down to Pedro, you know? And so Pedro's on the and Pedro's a very humble guy, and he gets on the radio, and afterwards, Lance Bachelor's the next guest on K-Bear 101 in Utah. He's the next guest. And they ask him, "How do you think you do against Pedro in a fight?" And he said, "Oh, I beat him easy. He's a little guy." And we're sitting in Pedro's club listening to this radio. And Pedro calls up the station and he goes, "Patch me into the host." He patches him in, and Pedro goes, "You think you can beat me? You want to fight?" And they set it up right there. And you can go on YouTube and watch this. It's got like 5 million views. It's called 150-pound Jiu-Jitsu Master against Mr. Utah bodybuilder, or 250-pound bodybuilder. And I was right there. In Pedro's corner. Yes. And the first, you know, Pedro wore shoes. He thought it was going to be outdoors. He didn't know where he was going to fight, so he wore shoes. wrestling shoes. And it actually was a weapon that because when they started the fight, he started kicking Lance in the knee, to kind of distract him. And then he punches him, 1-2 punch, breaks his nose, blood goes splattering all over Pedro's gi. It looks like he's been to a slaughterhouse. He's got all this blood on it. And then he gets him in an arm lock. They roll around for a while. The arm locks him. And Lonnie Foster, rest in peace, he stops the fight. And then Lance actually became a student of Pedro's, I think about 2 or 3 months later. He walked in there and nobody knew what was going to happen. They thought maybe he wanted revenge, but that's not what he wanted. He wanted to learn how to do jiu-jitsu.
That's a really cool story. Yeah, and I remember seeing a flex. He does like a bodybuilding flex when he's getting ready to fight. And I'm like, this isn't a bodybuilding contest. The flexing won't help you. So it's funny you mentioned that Hickson said that you were with. Did you know that Les Gutchis also said that you were the toughest guy he ever trained with?
I heard that on Chael Sonnen's podcast. Yeah, I love Les. He's awesome. He lived right here in Medford with me, and we trained together a little bit, not much, but he was a lot younger than me. But yeah, and I asked Les at the NCAA's last time I saw him. I go, how is it possible that 2 world champions came out of little Medford, Oregon? And he said to me, he goes, well, when I saw you do it, I thought, why can't I? And I thought that made me feel really good because I thought, oh, maybe I helped him, inspired him somehow. I don't know. Yeah. I was glad he told me that. So I never knew it.
And those are some really tough guys, Hickson and Les Gutchis. Question for you: who's the toughest guy you ever trained with?
Ever trained with or competed against or anything?
I'd be interested to know both.
Well, probably the toughest guy I ever wrestled in competition was Vladimir Medesian, who was the 1986 world champion. And yeah, we wrestled. He was a 4-time Tbilisi champion. Do you know what Tbilisi is?
Mm-mm.
It's basically the Russian national championships. It was known throughout the wrestling world as the toughest tournament in the world back when they were doing it, because there was 10 Russians in each weight class that were all capable of winning the world championships. So if you won Tbilisi, you were good. And this guy won it 4 times, and I wrestled him 4 times. I beat him 3.
Wow. So that's kind of, I guess, for folks.
The toughest guy I ever wrestled in practice was my brother. I just happened to be born. And I mean, think about this. I just happened to be born into the same family as the greatest high school wrestler in history. And when he was in high school, he won the Great Plains. He beat a 2-time NCAA champion and the NCAA Outstanding Wrestler. He beat the World Cup champion. He goes to Tbilisi and he takes a silver medal, which is better than anybody on the U.S. team. He comes back after missing all the state qualifying tournaments, and they allow him to go into state, but he has to go up a weight because he didn't weigh in. So he went up a weight, pinned his way into the finals, and beat the guy in the finals 12-1. Then he goes to the National Open. And this is at 170 pounds. Then he goes to the National Open Greco-Roman Championships at 149.5 pounds. And he wins that, and he gets the most falls in the least amount of time, all while he's still in high school. Now, I started wrestling because I was a gymnast. I started wrestling when I was a junior in high school. And my record, my first year, I started at 100. I was a gymnast, so I was really small. I was 123 pounds my sophomore year. And then my junior year, I was a 130-pound wrestler. And I only wrestled 10 matches that year. And my record was 4-6. And then the coach kicked me off the team because I wasn't winning enough. It was kind of funny. I went back after I won the Olympics, and they gave me the key to the city. He shows up at the ceremony. It was kind of awkward. But anyway, I go back to he kicks me off the team. I complained to the principal because he had a challenge match system where I complied with the system. And he still kicked me off the team, even though I was winning my challenge matches. And I thought that was morally wrong. And so I went to the principal, complained. The principal forces him to put me back on the team. But that destroyed the relationship by going to the principal. So I couldn't wrestle for him anymore. So I moved back in with my dad in Palo Alto, California. And my former gymnastics coach in high school is also coincidentally going to be my wrestling coach when I go into wrestling. So, yeah, so I didn't win. My record, my junior year was 4-6. My record, my senior year, going into for the entire regular season, it was 17-2 was my record. And I lost my 2 matches, both in the only 2 tournaments I had ever wrestled in my life, 2 16-man tournaments. And I lost my first match and I was eliminated immediately. And then the second one, I took 3rd. That was the only experience I had. But then a miracle happened. At the end of the year, I won the league, which was 9 schools, the region, which was 20 schools, the Central Coast section, which was 90 schools, and then the state, which is almost between 900 and 1,000 schools. It was a miracle. And I never trained with my brother one time from the time I started wrestling to the time I won the state. Everybody thinks Dave trained me to win the state. He didn't. He was off at Oklahoma State. He was 35-1 as a freshman at Oklahoma State, and he took 3rd in the NCAAs. He was named Freshman of the Year. And then he comes back from Oklahoma State that summer, and he go, "Hey, Mark, you want to go work out?" And I'd be like, "Nah, I don't feel like it." He'd be like, "You pussy." And I'm like, "Okay, you're going to die." So we go, and he would just kick the crap out of me like 30-0, every day. This happened every single day. And I just got so sick of getting killed. I couldn't score 1 point the whole summer. And finally I thought, you know what? I'm going to change strategies. Instead of me trying to score on him, I'm just going to play all defense. I'm going to just try to keep him from scoring on me. So every time he tried something, I'd back up, I'd block him off. I just became an incredible staller. And he hated me for that. And he was like, "Come on, you quit stalling, start wrestling." I'm like, "Hey, screw you. This is my life. My confidence is being destroyed by you. I'm not going to listen to you." So anyway, that was how we did. It was actually the best thing. I mean, he treated me so much more brutally than he treated his college wrestlers. It was unbelievable. If I asked, he'd never help me. He just figure it out yourself. So that was okay because I was a gymnast. I could look at a move and I could do it instantly because I was used to visualizing very complicated, risky techniques. So I learned extremely fast. Plus, I started my own technique book. I wrote my own technique book, and I studied it more than I studied anything else in high school. And it was easy to remember because it was my work. So if I got in trouble in like a position, a shot, I don't know how to finish, that page would flash into my head, and I'd have a menu of moves to choose from on how to finish. So that was and this friend of mine, there was a guy on my team named Jeff Newman who beat the Central Coast section champion as 90 schools at my weight. And I wrestled with him every day. And then after we get done with our Palo Alto high school practice, we'd go over to Gun High School and wrestle with the Stanford guys, which is a huge advantage. Wrestling college guys is huge because college guys are head and shoulders above high school guys, all of them. And I was doing good against them, and I was doing good against Jeff. And so when Jeff beat the Central Coast section, even though I hadn't won anything, I knew I was good enough to win. So winning state my senior year was so miraculous. I started to believe in God.
I've read that you were the first California state champion to not win a tournament championship.
I'm still the only California. And think about this. Dave got this one career. He's got this super incredibly successful senior year. I've got this incredibly different senior year. And I mean, you couldn't find two more opposites if you tried. And we're brothers. And what are the chances?
Yeah, we're familiar. I got all the looks and all the hair, all the height.
Before I move on, the crazy wrestling coach that cut Mark Schultz. Like that's
Yeah.
got to be his known for now.
Yeah. I don't ever mention his name. I don't want to embarrass him. He's actually a good guy. He just didn't know what he had. He didn't know who I was. He didn't know what was going to happen in the future. He's just doing his best. I think he wasn't really a wrestler. He was a football coach. He didn't really know much about wrestling.
See a lot of
but he did, huh?
You see a lot of that where guy, they don't have a wrestling coach, so the football coach is the wrestling coach, and they're many times not equipped if they don't if they didn't wrestle in high school wrestling team, but they put him there because they don't have anyone else.
He got us in shape, though. I gotta give him that. He trained our asses off, and that was good. But I never understood why he broke his own rule to kick me off the team. It just I felt so wronged, But that's okay. It was part of God's plan, I feel. If I hadn't done that, I might not have gone back to Palo Alto. I might not have been wrestling with those Stanford guys. Who knows what would happen.
You mentioned it a couple times in the show so far. It seems like that adversity is really what pushed you on. Like when you said the guy from the UFC said, "Oh, it'll be great to have an Olympic medalist lose," and you're like, "Yeah, that ain't happening." And getting kicked off the team and this situation with your brother, that it was you needed that adversity, that little kick in the butt to take things to the next level. If I heard you correctly, you said you wrote a technique book in high school.
Yes,
that's very mature. Like that's really mature. Do you think this is just something that was innate in you? Your ability, with gymnastics and your ability, like you said, to just once you saw a technique, you could do it, you could visualize it. I mean, visualization is such a huge part of success. So to have that, that insight in high school is extremely mature. Do you have any kind of thought on where that came from? Do you think it was just your God-given gift?
Yeah, I'll tell you exactly where it came from. Because my brother and I were separated. The reason I got into wrestling, when I quit gymnastics, I didn't go straight into wrestling. I went into Tang Sudo, which was a Chuck Norris style martial art, because I didn't get into wrestling to learn how to wrestle or win championships. I got in it to learn how to fight and how to defend myself. And I didn't know anything nobody really knew anything about which martial art was the best. They were just kind of, grasping at straws, looking at Black Belt magazine, watching Bruce Lee movies. And so I'm looking at Bruce Lee in Fist of Fury and Enter the Dragon, and he's kicking the crap out of 20 guys at once. And I'm like, man, if I could learn what he knows, I can at least beat one guy, my brother Dave. And so I had taken Tang Sudo for about 4 months. And then on my 16th birthday, my brother came up to Oregon to spend the birthday with me. And he knew how to get under my skin so well. He said something really disrespectful. And I said, okay, now I'm going to teach this guy who the real boss of the family is with my 4 months of Tang Sudo. And so we go out on the front lawn, and I took a swing at him. He took me down with a double leg and pounded my face into complete just pulp. And I was so embarrassed, I slept in the car that night. But the next day I said, screw Tang Sudo, I'm going out for the wrestling team. And then I didn't know really why Dave was so good. And everybody kept telling me the reason he's so good is because he's a master technician. And so I thought, okay, I have to be a master technician too. So, and Dave he kept his own notebook too. So I'm going to follow Dave's path. And I wrote my own technique book, and that really helped a lot.
We have a similar story. Jacob started in wrestling and combat sports long before me, and started jiu-jitsu before me, and I'm 8 years older than him. So when he was little, I used to beat his ass all the time, no problem. But then he got grown and he got big and he got bigger than me. and he knew how to fight. And so I started jujitsu, and I just focused on leg locks because I knew he'd never done them. And the last time we tangled was not the same fight.
Are you guys in the same house, or where are you guys located?
No, I'm in New York City, and he's in Raleigh.
Okay, gotcha.
Yeah, we haven't lived in the same state in over 20 years, but we threw down in what? It was August, right? We trained together in August.
It was August.
Yeah, it was August.
So Dave, Mark, I want to circle back to something you mentioned, the double wrist lock. I also mentioned the Kimura lock as well. In 1984, was that technique when you hit it on broke his elbow? Was that an illegal technique? Because I read that thing, y'all.
What?
They had referees hounding you and your brother because they said you and rambunctious out there. So they had the referees keep an extra eye on y'all, and it was a disqualification.
Yeah.
But I think that was legal.
It was legal up until I did it. Then it was illegal. That's true. They made a rule that day. And what they said was that I took when you're doing that, you're basically pulling the arm over his head. And if you go beyond the 90-degree angle, I had never heard this before. I think they made it up. If you go to 91 degrees, it's illegal. And they couldn't figure out whether I had taken his arm beyond the 90-degree angle or not. It looked like it was pretty straight 90-degree angle. So they didn't really have much evidence that I had broken the rule that they just made. And so they gave me, after I did that move, he fell on his back. I covered him. I looked at the ref to hurry up and call the pin. As soon as he called the pin, I got up. I'm like, yes, I got the #1 guy out of the tournament. This guy was ranked #1 in the world. He was from Turkey, and he beat all the Russians that boycotted the Olympics. And he was European champion. His name was Reza Karabajak. He died of COVID last year. Anyway, rest in peace. But the way you do weigh-ins at the Olympics is you step on a scale, buck naked, you reach in a bucket, you pull an egg out, and inside the egg, there's a number. And if you're an odd number, you go on the odd side of the bracket. If you're an even number, you go on the even side of the bracket. Well, I reach in and I pull out the number 6. Well, Reza Karabajak's standing right behind me, and he gets on the scale next, and he pulls out the number 8. So first match, 2 wrestles 4, 6 wrestles 8. I got the gold medal match, my very first match. This is only my second international tournament. I'm pissing my pants. I go back to my hotel room, and I cannot focus. I'm just staring at the wall, sweating like a pig, just waiting, just sweating, just thinking, And so the match comes around, and he does a limp arm to a high crotch, gets him super deep. And I had never done this move before. I have a history of doing all these moves for the first time in competition. I don't know why, but I had seen it. I saw this Cuban do it to some guy from Paraguay or Uruguay or one of those Guay countries. And I just said, it's him or me, and it's going to be me. And I threw it, and he hit his head, stopping his momentum, and his elbow just snapped immediately. So I blame him. No, I'm kidding. I don't blame him.
That's an interesting story. And yeah, when I saw it, I'm looking at it, and I'm like, there's not any. Now, one thing that kind of drives me crazy is how they changed the rules of freestyle. I guess they've got some form of committee. The point when I was wrestling, pushouts weren't worth the point.
Yeah, what happened was the match right before. What?
I said, I guess they changed the rules on you that day.
That's right. They made a rule against my brother's front headlock the same tournament, the 84 Olympics, because of the way he was doing it. And Dave hurt the Yugoslavian the match right before I broke the Turk's arm. And the head of the national world governing body is a Yugoslavian. So he watches his countryman get his knee mangled, And then he sees me, the brother of the guy that just committed this horrible crime. He sees the brother committing another crime the very next match. So they decide to, first they called him pinned. And I'm like, yes, I got him out of the tournament. And then I had another match that day, which I won. And the referees really screwed me bad. But I still won. And I'm sitting in the bleachers with my mom. And they announce over the loudspeaker, Mark Schultz has just been disqualified for excessive brutality. And my mom freaks out. She thinks I've been thrown out of the tournament. I was like, don't worry about it. It's double elimination. As long as I keep winning my matches, I can still win the gold. She hadn't processed. I had all that processed. She hadn't processed any of that yet. But I forgot what I was going to say.
Well, it's interesting that they were just hounding y'all because it was before your finals match that the comment extra referees, special referees to watch you and Dave.
That's what they did. They assigned Rafael Martinetti, the #1 official in the world, to watch mine and Dave's matches the rest of the tournament. So everybody had 3. They had a referee and then 2 match judges. But me and Dave had a referee, 2 match judges, and Martinetti. So they thought, after I break the Turk's arm, they're like, what's up with these Schultz brothers? And then so they were watching us the rest for dirty moves.
Wow.
But the bottom line is, to tell you the truth, the bottom line is good guys will not go down unless you inflict pain. You just have to, they're so good. They've got such great balance. You gotta inflict pain to score on these guys that are so good. And the difference between the best guy in the world and the second best guy is like paper thin. I mean, you might blow him out, but it's still he could blow you out the next day. I mean, a lot of it, it's conditioning, it's technique, and it's also luck.
Yeah, it's funny you mentioned those like top guy family, like the Granby style, Granby roll and all that on the East Coast. Wrestling with Michael Martin, who wrestled at Illinois, was a 4-time Virginia State champion. It was the same thing. Couldn't do anything to score on the guy. And I wrestled him so many times, it just became. So I mentioned this when we talked a little bit earlier. I see a lot of these, like, some time that on social media have kind of kept a pretty low profile. Gene Mills, a lot of these guys that I'm friends with, and they just like the podcasting that you see this generation of young kids doing and getting a lot of attention, even though that really have the most knowledge and the most experience. Why do you think that is, that just are content to keep themselves?
Honestly, I think when Dave came along, he changed the paradigm. Wrestling before Dave came along was just almost a purely conditioning sport. Just condition like crazy, drive your opponent into exhaustion, and any technique will work after that. It was a brutal system. But Dave became a technician. And because his way he was built, Dave was not built like me. I was built like a typical wrestler. Dave was built more like, I don't know, a chemistry professor. I don't know. They're like, how did this guy with this build beat these great guys, these 2-time NCAA champions, World Cup champions? How's he doing it? It's got to be technique. That's the only reason that would make sense to most people. But people don't know Dave was incredibly strong. When he threw legs on me, I swear it had to be illegal.
So kind of going off of that, on Facebook recently, starting up your own podcast. So would that be
I want to start my own.
Yeah, or is it like your life experiences or wrestling? Because
I'd probably just model myself after Joe Rogan.
Yeah. So
my dad was a professional comedian. That's why I'm so fucking funny. No, I'm kidding.
You know who you should have on your podcast? Channing Tatum.
brilliant. You are brilliant.
The first guy to come to mind.
Yeah, I got the looks. He got the brains.
I mean, yeah, you could reminisce with Hickson on. I know Joe Rogan's had Hickson on. I think your viewership would be through the roof.
Yeah, I tell people, you know, it was very difficult to find someone to play me in the movie, and the only person I could come up with was People Magazine's Sexiest Man Alive.
You went from Magic Mike to playing you.
That's right.
And you know the Steve Carell part, because I've seen John DuPont. It's like there's a lot of live footage. You know, there's the movie, and then there's the documentaries and such, and strange, very weird, creepy, in a very creepy way. Do you think Steve Carell played a good part?
I thought all the actors did a good job, but I did not like my character. But that's not Channing's fault. That's the director, Bennett Miller's fault. Bennett Miller is on record with the Washington Times saying, my intention from the beginning was to demean and disrespect Mark Schultz.
Wow.
You broke up, Jacob. Yeah. Do you know what was behind that?
Yeah. Why?
Jealousy, envy. I don't know. He's a real weak, physically, mentally weak man. He's very selfish. I did everything I could to help him become the best director he could be. And for him to do that to me, there's no excuse. Scum.
It was a great movie. I mean, it was a eye-opening movie. You know, if that means anything,
I hate that movie. I'm glad you like it. I hate it.
So in the back of your
mind, have you read my book? Have you read my book?
Which one?
Foxcatcher.
Oh no, I haven't. I figured they would be somewhat in line. I guess not.
It's completely different. There's no relation between my book and that movie. None.
Wow.
Everybody thinks that's a true crime book. It's not. It's an autobiography. I get people all the time going, Mark Schultz is all about me. Well, it's my autobiography. What are you supposed to do?
Oh, that's crazy.
We have some homework to do, Jacob. We got to read the book and watch the movie again.
Yeah.
You won't believe.
You did one about John DuPont, a book, I believe, and then there's Foxcatcher as well. So I'll have to check in. And I honestly thought that the movie would have been something. You know how Marcus Luttrell had a big part in The Lone Survivor. I figured that was something that you were scenes the whole time, kind of walking them through everything. I guess not.
No. I was only on the set for like maybe 7 days, something like that. And they filmed for like 3 months. And basically, Bennett Miller told me after 7 days that I could stay on the set, but I'd have to pay my own hotel fees. Where he's got like hundreds and thousands of extras being paid every day, and he can't pay for my hotel. I mean, the reason why he was doing that was because he was demeaning and disrespecting me in the scenes that were coming up that he was going to create. He knew I wasn't going to like.
Wow.
Yeah, he didn't want to get blasted either.
Yeah, I was going to say, come off. You can to the average weakling, maybe come off as a little bit intimidating. As I mentioned earlier, he's probably thinking, man, if I show some scenes that don't make him look good, he might put some.
Yeah, I mean, it's really a shame because this is a worldwide movie. Here are these people that don't know me are getting this idea about me that's not even true.
Yeah.
Terrible.
Yeah. I have a
Yeah.
question for you. Are you still coaching currently?
Yeah, I have a jiu-jitsu wrestling camp seminar business.
Nice.
Mark Schultz grappling.
Nice.
Do you travel around with that?
Yes. I've got one coming up here, a local one, the 25th.
So I know what my brother's thinking. He just opened a jiu-jitsu school in Brooklyn. Gotta bring Mark out. I'll come up from Raleigh. If you bring Mark out for a seminar,
Well, my first question would be, what's your advice for somebody that wants to learn wrestling at 45 years old?
Well, it's never too old to learn, but I would start writing my own technique book.
That's very good advice. I think about my own technique, and my main application is just largely for MMA, because jiu-jitsu guys suck at wrestling, so I don't have to worry about that. But the MMA guys are kind of good at it. They're better than me, and I have this technique of defending punches with my face, and I think I need to evolve that one. I've been told I got a pretty good chin, but man, it's not making me any prettier. But it's funny, like after doing jiu-jitsu for 7 years and then, realizing that I have absolutely shit wrestling, I started to take it seriously, and it is hard. It's hard work. Jiu-jitsu, you can just lay on your back and, let guys scramble around you and then just leg lock them and it's over. Jacob. But MMA don't work that way because they're, you got to work to the ground, and it's not always pretty the way that you get to the ground in MMA. So I've been forced to wrestle, and it's been hard. It's one of the hardest things I've ever done.
Yeah. I was going to say something. I forgot what it was.
Well, to your point, I think a lot about like what works for me. So coming up with like my own technique book, I think would actually be very beneficial. And then like how to really build off of that. I mean, do you think, how they say in jiu-jitsu that, your personality will favor certain techniques? Like you need to learn them all, but certain things are just going to suit your personality. Would you say the same is true of wrestling? Because I've never really heard anybody ask that or anybody speak to that.
Yeah, like Dave was really a really great technician. He had a lot of different techniques. My techniques were just as good, but I didn't have as many as he did. So I had to be very secretive about my technique. I never told anybody anything that I did. I never talked to anybody. If you'd have known me in college, you'd have thought I was a deaf mute. I mean, I didn't want to give anybody any reason to think that I was approachable and think that I would show them anything. And, one of the things that I was really good at was escaping from the bottom and writing. And I had this technique that is so simple and so effective. Nobody could hold me down. After my sophomore year in college, nobody ever got writing time on me because of this this concept I used to employ. And I think I did a seminar for Pedro back at his annual convention last month, and that's the first time I've ever showed that technique to anybody.
Wow.
All right, we'll be making a trip.
Okay, we'll book the planes and get all that stuff sorted.
I got to get an edge on these guys, man.
We'll take care of your hotel also. We won't tell you to get your own hotel. Coming up on an hour, I've just got one more question for you. It goes back to old Chael Sonnen. He said with a black belt on and said that if anybody can take this off of me, then it's yours. Is that?
That's he's actually really close to the truth. It's a little bit different than the way he described, but not much. What happened was I was a student of Pedro's for a long time, like 3 years, and he advanced me up to a blue belt after 3 years. But I was beating everybody. And I asked him, what, after he was in my corner at the UFC and I won, I go, Pedro, you got to give me a black belt. Well, he didn't give it to me right away. And I asked him, what is the what do you give black belts based on? And he said, I give them based on the loyalty that the student spends, the loyalty the student has for me, the time the student spends with me, and skill. It's not just skill. Whereas like after that, I started training with a guy named Walt Bayless, who's a really tough guy out of Utah. Do you know him?
He's a Sambo guy, right? Yeah.
Yeah. I trained with him, and he showed me a lot of leg locks, heel hooks, and toe holds and stuff. And he and he gave me a black belt in 2 weeks. And we just went down to Meyer and Frank and bought a black belt for $6, and that was it. And then I started my own club at the Midvale Athletic Club, and Chael Sonnen comes up to me one time, and I'm wearing my black belt. I think it was in the BYU wrestling room. And he asked me, how'd you get your black belt? I said, well, I went down to Meyer and Frank, and I paid $6. And if anybody can take it away from me, they can have it.
And so he kind of twisted that into you. I think he said you went into Pedro's.
Right. I would never disrespect Pedro by wearing a different color belt than he gave me. He gave me a black belt. I'm a black belt
for you. Sure.
It's more dramatic. Chael's very good storyteller.
Yeah,
I love Chael. He's so good.
That's anybody's going to try to take that black belt off you.
He got the basics of the story right.
You're right, yeah. And then he twisted it around to make it Chael. You know, he's got to Chael it up a little bit more engaging than reality. Like
he's like a Hollywood director. No, I'm kidding. I don't know.
Would be another good one for your podcast.
Chael would be a great director. I should hire him to make my next movie.
Yeah, you could just to put it in the face of the previous director. Just kind of do a realistic look with a little bit of Chael's influence, and make it a little bit of a.
I'm planning on making another movie. I'm planning on making my story into a movie. My story was never made into a movie. He changed it so much; it's unrecognizable. I want to tell my story.
You should.
I think I'm going to focus on my senior year in high school. Because that's a pretty year.
Yeah. You said 9. Was that
sorry?
There was 9? Oh, was that over 9 at state tournament? Because California is a big state. And I know they just have one tournament.
There's one tournament, one class. It's either 900 or 1,000 schools.
Crazy.
I had a very important Indian teacher named Jiddu Krishnamurti, which I read all of his books, and I really was attracted to his thoughts on fear. And I studied him like I studied no one else. And I got to where I could tell you what he was going to say before he said it. And he taught me how to live in the present, live in the moment. Don't think of the past. Don't think of the future. Observe the world and observe your mind for what is, not what should be. So when I went to a tournament like the state championships, where it's almost overwhelming, and the guy that I beat in the finals of CCS, the Central Coast section that had 90 schools, he got beat pretty bad his first match, and that was against some guy that was, I don't know, 5th in their region or something, section. And so I'm thinking these guys are the toughest guys in the world, because I barely beat Joe Guillory in the Central Coast section. So, but I just continued to live by the teachings of Jiddu Krishnamurti and just observe my mind, observe the world, and observe the present. Every step I'm taking with my foot, the past dies every moment. It's dead and gone. And when I go up and I looked at the bracket sheet, I would see who my next match was. And as soon as I saw him, I'd walk away. I didn't want to know anything that went beyond that. It didn't matter. It was another world. And my life is now. And I think that helped me a lot too.
Yeah, that's a really interesting perspective. Because like if you gone, I'm not sure if Fargo Freestyle Nationals was around. But if you go to see the brackets at Fargo if you just look at the bracket, it's like, I can't win this tournament. Look at how many guys there are. Tons.
Yeah. It's overwhelming.
That's great.
So-
we usually end the show and ask our guests to like leave with like some departing, words of wisdom, and you just unsolicited knock that one out of the park.
Okay, good.
Yeah.
Yeah.
For advice, I mean, because you saw such a wealth of experience, and your career has just been amazing. Would that be your advice to aspiring athletes to just kind of live in the moment?
Absolutely. I think we should all do that, whether you're an athlete or not.
Wow. Words from a strong. Well, Mark, it's coming up on an hour now, a little bit over actually. It's our honor to have you on our show.
It's an honor for me.
See
Thank
that
you.
second movie, and see your podcast as well.
Yeah, it's coming.
Nice.
I'll be ready. Thanks a bunch.
Thanks,
Mark,
guys.
appreciate you.
All right, everybody. Thanks for tuning in. What a special treat for us today. Like my brother said, thank you, Mark, for coming on. It's been a huge honor for us. And thank you all for listening. Keep your eye out for some short clips from this on social media in the near future, and probably on the website in December. Guys, have a good one. We'll see you next time.